more feedback on this API and what people think of it and whether it's a good direction, so that we can kind of proceed in getting this merged and then implemented for the next release of Istio. So I'm not too crazy about the name for this API, FilterAugment, but that's what I've sort of settled on as a temporary name. The idea being that it's a filter that's sort of beyond what Istio normally configures, so extra filter or some custom filter. And you specify a set of match clauses which identifies which which sidecars or gateways should apply this filter and which listeners. So in this case, I've listed the hosts as the reviews.prod service. So any listener that is an inbound listener for that service should get this filter in this example. Then there's an order clause which tells Pilot where, with respect to other filters, this one should be inserted. So this one should be inserted just before the router filter. And then this is an HTTP filter, and it just has a name and a config. So this inserts an envoy.lua filter with this function in it. So that's the kind of basic example. You supply some matches to tell which listeners to insert the filter. You supply an order to tell it where in the listener, and then you actually just supply the filter config as a proto.struct.
Aside from gateway selection spike, did you add something to control source selection?
As in the source of the traffic, or?
Yeah, because you have outbound, right, as a possible direction.
Correct.
Which means that if we're binding to outbound, we can bind to sources selected by label.
Yes. So I have not put that into the match criteria, but we could. So. Okay. We're saying that you would only want to select sidecars that match some particular source criteria, like either a service or a label selector or something like that.
Right, because then, if we're going to do it, people will almost certainly want some form of incremental rollout, right? So.
Yeah. Okay.
The same would probably be true on gateway, although right now the only binding we have is by name.
Yeah, so that was one of the questions that I wanted to get feedback on, is that right now all of the match criteria are based on name, so it's host name and gateway name. A more Kubernetes style thing would be to do this with a label selector, and I don't know how people feel about names versus label selectors. Do we want both? Do we want
kind of already
the other?
We've adopted the idiom of host name selection and gateway name selection for virtual service.
Yeah.
Destination rule and auth policy. So I think we should stick with it.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, I hadn't seen this before, so I will take a look at this and make sure I get my feedback into you. But my first impression is this all seems pretty reasonable.
Okay.
Hey, Spike, what kind of filters are you targeting initially? Like, what is it based on, I guess?
Well, so the use case that I'm particularly interested in is being able to insert the envoy.external authz filter, so that it can call out to a authorization service like Calico. But it's certainly not restricted to that use case. I know there's some interest from many users for inserting arbitrary Lua filters. So that's the example that I've provided.
Right. I mean, in theory, we should be able to use this mechanism to insert the mixer filter too.
Yeah. So there was a comment, I think, from Quat about that, and that's probably worth discussing whether we want that to be a goal of this, or whether we want to just limit it down to these are filters beyond what Istio would normally insert for you.
Yeah, I think it's probably, unless it's trivial and immediately apparent how we would make it work for Mixer, we should probably leave Mixer out.
I haven't done that analysis, but I will. It may be trivial in terms of implementation with respect to this API and the sort of code that has to live in pilot. What might be less trivial is how this interacts with the mesh config and whether you turn on or off Mixer in the old way that we have been doing.
Yes, that's true. I mean, in theory, the same should be true for the RBAC filter as well.
The one that
the min is working.
Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly what their proposal is for how that gets turned on or off in the mesh, but this would certainly be a way that it could be turned on or off.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't think we need to solve all problems, and clearly not for 1.0.
Right.
So it's probably fine if there are impedance mismatch issues, just to kind of open tracking issues for them, and leave this API in alpha state.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, are the filters able to change which routes and clusters end up getting selected for the request?
They can.
So HTTP filters can do basically literally anything to the HTTP request. And that can include adding or removing headers, which could affect a routing decision.
Okay, thank you.
So I know filters can be applied at many levels in Envoy. Are you going to target just applying them at a route level and then based on rules within Istio?
So these are being applied. So the filter chain is set at a scope of a listener. So each listener has a filter chain, and it has a network layer filter chain, which then includes the HTTP manager filter, which then has its own set of HTTP filters inside it. So you can select what listener types, which is based on what Istio thinks the protocol of the traffic is going to be, whether it is TCP or HTTP. Broadly, that sort of determines whether it gets the HTTP filter put into it or not, and whether you could do routing. And then we also allow you to supply configuration for either an HTTP filter or a network filter. So in this API, you can insert a network filter into either type of listener. And if you want to insert an HTTP filter, obviously that only makes sense if you insert it into an HTTP listener that already has the HTTP manager. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, just to be clear too, will you be able to apply these at a route level? I don't think so, right?
No. So yeah, I don't think there's a mechanism in Envoy that allows you to alter the filter chain based on the route selection.
Right, or to apply filters post-routing.
Correct. Yeah, the routing filter in the HTTP manager is the one that actually sends the traffic to a cluster and sort of sends it out of Envoy.
Yeah, and I think I know there is some metadata that you can provide to kind of get down to a route level in Envoy.
Yes, I mean you certainly will be able to modify things that will affect routing, but I don't think that you can say this filter should only apply if this route is the one that is selected.
I think that actually it could be. So I created an issue in Envoy that I think was merged, or with PR that was merged around. So you can attach metadata to your routes, I believe, and that get fed into filters that you can reference, like metadata. I'd have to find it again though.
Okay.
And I don't know. I don't think we exposed the metadata through Istio yet.
Yeah, we would have to start putting that into a virtual service.
Yeah, yeah. But it's kind of like for people to know, I think that you probably aren't going to get route level filtering, at a route level.
Yeah, no, certainly not with this proposal, but
yeah.
Spike, are you thinking of use cases which are effectively global?
Well, that is definitely included in the use cases because that's our use case. But it is not intended to be useful only on those use cases. At least by global, I'm interpreting that to mean this is a filter that I want to be inserted more or less globally across the mesh. But you can target it down. You can say, just for this specific service, I want you to insert this filter. Or just this specific gateway.
Where it would not work is if you need to work at the weighted cluster level. And that's an issue in general with Envoy. You cannot do stuff specific to a weighted cluster. It has to be per service, right? So that's similar to timeouts or
right. So we have issues, but this is right. This is attached to listener.
Right.
Yeah. So this is before that phase of the dispatch. You can still obviously write code in whatever filter you're trying to do some form of selection based on metadata.
Right.
I don't know. Can Lua filters call other filters, Spike?
I don't
know if we tried that.
I don't know. I mean, they can definitely call external services.
Right.
But I don't know whether or not it's possible to call a filter as if it were
a function.
A function or something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
What I heard was that we couldn't put these filters to routes, but we could to services.
Yes, exactly.
For Cloud Foundry use cases, those are effectively the same. So
and you're conflating two different kinds of services here. What they're saying is that you can scope these things to listeners on particular sidecars. You can say that this is going to go on this sidecar, not that sidecar, or on this gateway, not that gateway. But they're saying that you cannot do this based on what upstream it's going to connect to.
Well, no, because we create multiple listeners, one per upstream service. So, like in a typical sidecar, if there's 10 other services in the mesh, there'll be 10 listeners, one for each of those services in the mesh. And so you can scope it down to say, I want this to apply just to listeners that go to service foo.
Is that true? That's true for TCP services. Is that also true for HTTP? I thought all the HTTP services go through a single
right, I thought so too, Spike.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It's by port.
Yeah, it's by port.
Gabe, I'm thinking about the use cases for which we'd want the gateway to, app developers would want the edge gateway to do transformations which are unique to a Cloud Foundry route. And whether
so we could write a filter, yes.
And have those applied via filter rather than making calls out to Mixer. And
right, so you can
transformation should in fact take place at the gateway or at the sidecar, ingress sidecar.
Right, so you could write a filter that matches particular host headers and then transforms the host header, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if that's supported, then that's comforted.
That's something you have to put into the filter itself. Right, this is just a way to enable that filter and trigger in the right context.
Right, and so does this mean for every, if we wanted a use case like that, for every rewrite of the host header we wanted, we would need to install a new filter, or is there a way of having a shared data structure that's being accessed by a single filter?
So in principle, you can have shared data structures that are accessed by filters and things like that. In the specific example of a Lua filter, which is something that you can insert sort of inline code with this API, I don't know whether or not that's true. But if you wanted to, go to the trouble of writing a new Envoy filter right in C++, then you have a ton of flexibility about what kinds of things you can access.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
One comment here regarding the HTTP filter. I don't know if you are aware that we also have HTTP proxy filter. HTTP proxy listener, which allows you intercepting traffic without IP tables, which is used in some environments.
Oh, okay.
That relates to the previous discussion if we capture by port or if we capture by IP, which we do both. We also have listeners bound on the HTTP VIP, but that's something we hope to get rid at some point.
Constant, where can I read more about that?
It's a feature we had for quite a while, but I don't think we have a lot of documentation because it's very rarely used. My point is it will probably need a bit of I don't know, documentation to specify or better targeting to specify if it's for an HTTP filter where it applies. I mean, it should probably apply to all HTTP filters so we can cap. I don't know. I mean, that's a tricky problem. Because don't forget, we still have two kinds of listeners. We have listeners bound to the port, and we still have listeners bound to the actual VIP of the HTTP service. So you will probably need to put it in both listeners, I suppose.
Into both chains.
I think I'll probably have to modify this proposal to match based on port for outbound listeners, since that's the actual.
The other one, because if it's just by port, then the VIP-based selection will also kind of create problems.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the opposite. I mean, just say that, hey, it's a list of HTTP filters, and we apply the HTTP filters to all listeners, all inbound listeners, for example.
Well, I think that's there in the API custom, right? I mean, if he doesn't put the declaration for port, it's got to assume to be all things.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how implementation will. Yeah, you're right. I mean,
yeah. So for inbound listeners, it's sort of clear, but for outbound listeners, you would have to just apply it to.
For outbound, it's clear, and outbound it's much simpler. And the other comment I had is in the API so far we have a pretty clear distinction between inbound and outbound. For outbound, we use destination rules. For inbound, we use virtual service, and then there is authentication policy. It may be less confusing if we also had two top-level augmentations, if you want to use that word, to keep kind of the separation, because it's also cleaner. For outbound, it's much easier since host is clearly the main thing, and they need to match a destination policy rule.
Yeah, I'll have to look in detail. My worry, though, is that destination rules are essentially related to routes, which, as we've discussed, is not a scope where you can hang a filter off of.
Right.
Yeah, I'll have to do some more analysis on how to do the match consistently for outbound filters.
Well, the outbound routes are also, at least for TCP, there are listeners that captures the traffic and apply on the outbound direction. I mean, it's first a listener, and then there is an outbound cluster.
Yeah, yeah.
And destination rules typically apply to kind of the entire set of listener plus outbound cluster.
Right.
So, Kostin, if we separate the listener, as we discussed with Piotr, into inbound and outbound listeners, so what they need to, like, again, specify where does the filter apply?
That should not be a part of an API surface. I mean, that's something that's internally done, and it's up to the implementation how it captures traffic and how it. But yeah, it adds another wrinkle of complication, another reason to kind of keep a clear distinction between outbound listener plus cluster, which have slightly different semantics than inbound. That's my whole. And keep in mind that authentication policy, it's another set of confusion for the user. I mean, it's slightly different way to select the targets and to apply policies.
We're going to fix that part.
We're going to fix it, but
yeah. So let's review this API, right? As right, whether it's specifying the intent of the user properly, and then let's see how we can resolve it to what the implementation does, because the implementation is changing. So far, I haven't seen anything here that seems unreasonable from an intent perspective. So let's just make sure that we've got that it's a fairly usable API. And if there are obvious impedance mismatch problems, let's call them out and try and figure out how to resolve them.
Cool. And the other thing that I wanted to discuss, because I'm not sure that it has been explicitly, is are we okay with this being something that we ship in 1.0?
Yeah, I mean, it's an alpha feature, right? We're only going to
Yeah.
attack the API as alpha. As long as it doesn't destabilize anything, and it comes with a big caveat that if you use this, you may blow your foot off.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that there's been emails circulating about make sure that we're only merging stuff that has been approved for 1.0, and so. But yeah, I think that.
Yeah, I mean the criteria is if it's not part of our kind of stable feature set that we call production ready, which this won't be, then how is it turned on? Does that code affect the stability of other parts of the stack? As long as it meets a reasonable bar there, then I think it's fine. Like we can't stop people developing features, right? But we are trying to make sure that features are put in a safe way.
And
yeah, this is pretty independent.
Yeah.
Well,
it would be good to protect it with a flag as well. So if things do get destabilized after it's merged, we can turn it off.
One thing about stable and non-stable, there was a discussion about moving the rest of the networking to beta level. I mean, the virtual service and the others. I assume this will stay behind or
oh yeah, this is not going to go beyond alpha.
Yeah, that's I'm sure that.
All right, cool. Don't want to take up this whole meeting, so that's all I had.
Okay, it's good. We can go to the next topic. I'd just like to reply to Tiago on chat. Could you please send me an email with your email so I can send the invite to you? And other than that, we have the meeting is somewhere in one of the Istio pages. So for people who don't have the invite, like there is a place I can add it to the meeting notes as well. But if you want to have like a direct invitation, please send me an email. All right, so I think we can move to the next item in the agenda, which is, okay, so HTTP 2 requires termination of TLS at the service. So this is a use case from Cloud Foundry, and Shannon would like to cover it and discuss a bit about it. Shannon or Gabe?
Can I just, because I have to run now, but I just want to say, Shannon, I'm going to follow the gRPC team and the Golang team here at Google. This is a bit silly. So I'm going to put some pressure on them to support H2C, because there are real use cases for TLS offload, and yeah, they should just come around on this. I know what the H2 spec says. There are lots of people who disagree with what the H2 spec says. So I think we'll make some progress here, and I'm happy to pick up the baton and corral people here at Google to make progress.
I was hoping to get alignment and or at least get an understanding from the Istio community and Google in particular about the use cases, given the context of Istio, the use cases for H2 and limitations incurred by current frameworks or frameworks currently. And
right, so the H2 spec says that if you're going to use H2 in public, you should use H2, which mandates end-to-end TLS. But the H2C spec does exist for a reason. Go chose not to implement it for reasons that I don't fully understand, but I am going to go and find out about. I think it's because some internal wrangling. The gRPC team doesn't have a principal stance on this because the other gRPC implementations implement H2C support, and so don't require end-to-end TLS in the libraries.
My understanding, and maybe the only data point I have is the Ruby library, but the gRPC Ruby library requires TLS.
There are probably some outliers, but certainly the Java one, the .NET one, the C++ one do not require TLS.
The Python one.
I'm sorry, what?
Oh, I just said the Python one also doesn't require it.
Can you clarify for me what the H2C spec is? I thought that was H2 over agnostic TCP.
Right,
Is
so
that
it's
right?
It's H2 in clear text. That's what the C stands for.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So if a workload is written in a framework that supports H2C, then the sidecar proxy handling ingress should be able to terminate less, do all the certificate management, and send clear text H2 to the workload. Is that right?
Yes.
Not quite. The sidecar will do H2. I mean, the sidecar will implement the full H2. So the communication will be H2.
All right, I really have to run, guys.
Okay,
but
thank you.
I will pick up the baton on this one because this is a bit silly.
Okay.
Thanks, Louis.
Louis,
So
can I?
actually,
Yeah, feel free to shoot me emails or whatever.
All right.
so actually, Shannon, like we kind of jumped. So I'm not sure if everybody in the meeting understands the use case because they may not have followed on the Slack discussion necessarily. So would you mind just giving a brief overview?
Of course. So we're thinking of H2 in the context of a data path in which a request is made by an H2 compliant external client, which would first hit a load balancer that may or may not terminate TLS, which then forwards a request to a gateway, platform gateway router, which then forwards the request to a ingress sidecar, which then forwards the request to a containered workload. And we're trying to figure out how those workloads can leverage H2 for performance benefits, the concurrency in H2, or for other reasons. Maybe they want to use gRPC protocol. And we're running into issues where frameworks like Golang, as an example, only support H2 if the workload itself terminates TLS. And this is a problem before us because both Cloud Foundry and Istio Service Mesh, we believe, provide tremendous value in removing the burden for management of certificates from the app developer. We don't want the app developer to have to include certificates in their application code. We don't want the application developer to have to worry about terminating TLS. We want the sidecar and the edge gateway to take care of all of this for them, and the sidecar to do clear text all the time with the local workload.
If I cannot hear, all the other features of Istio would be disabled if H2 is terminated by the application, because we'll get no metrics, we'll get no policy, we cannot apply any of the Istio features. So any application terminating H2 will effectively not use Istio.
Yes, if we were to attempt to support H2 for these workloads, given current limitations, it seems like all of the intermediating routing components would have to pass through TCP, and we would lose all these benefits. And that doesn't seem viable for us. So we're interested in supporting H2 while maintaining all the benefits that the Cloud Foundry platform and the Service Mesh proxy model enable.
Okay, thank you.
If I can, one small comment here. Besides gRPC, there is another nice feature of H2, which is push support, which unfortunately right now is not supported as far as I know in Envoy, and we don't have any kind of way to do it if Envoy is terminating. But that's something we probably need to scrap at some point because push is important.
So what does this mean specifically?
It means that if Istio is used with H2, and then Envoy is terminating TLS and handling H2, forwarding to the application, I believe the push may or may not work properly.
Oh,
Push
I
is
see.
for a web page to send requests, to send results without being asked for them.
Oh, okay, that's what it.
Costin, you mean once an H2 connection is established initially, much like WebSockets, the server can push data back to the client?
Yes, and that's something we haven't tested, and I don't know if it works. That's what I have.
So you're thinking that an Envoy will support establishing a persistent connection, but only for inbound requests.
I
Like
think
once that persistent connection is established, it doesn't support server sent events or server sent data.
It should support, but it's something that we haven't tested, and I know if it works depending on how the connection is multiplexed. So it's something we need to keep track of and make sure we support at some point.
All right.
That's very important for page optimization. If you terminate a web page, that's an important optimization to be able to send CSS and other things beforehand without a full round trip.
It would be fine for us if we got at least the inbound multiplexing to start with, and added the server sent later. That would be fine.
Just putting it on the list so we don't forget about it.
Okay.
Okay, so for this push support, if there is a real use case and requirement, is it worth following up with Envoy? Opening an issue there?
Testing first if it works, or maybe it already works, and if it doesn't work, following up with Envoy and make sure they.
Okay, so maybe we'll open an issue in Istio.
But I don't think
push support doesn't work today in Envoy.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Harvey, for confirming.
And I don't think it's a priority for 1.0, but it's something we need to keep track of. Important feature.
Yeah. So
we can open an issue.
So this is because am I on? So this is because you are using Envoy in the path that goes directly to a browser, or eventually to a browser.
Yeah, at least 2 Envoys.
A number of employees and maybe a browser, maybe some mobile device that is using web push. There are other use cases for H2 push besides browsers.
I mean, this is definitely one of the talking points of H2, but I actually spent a lot of previous years in the web performance world, and I found that with a lot of experiments, it was hard to get H2 push to actually help, but it does work. I mean, it is nice if it works, but I'm not sure it actually makes web pages faster generally, except under very specially. But that's kind of besides the point. It's part of the H2, and maybe it should be part of our.
Yeah, if it's part of the H2 spec, and we want to enable app developers to experiment with it, and we want the service mesh to transparently support that spec.
I would say that I'm more interested in the use of web push for use of push for web push, which is a protocol used by browsers and maybe IoT devices to get push the notifications that asynchronous notification. I don't know how they are typically called. Notifications, web push. The IETF standard is web push.
So Shannon or Costin, can one of you just maybe open the issue like in Envoy, and we'll see Harvey from there, like how the how it goes in the long term. So at least we don't just discuss. We have an issue out of that.
Yeah, I can start.
Okay, thanks. So anything else on this topic?
My takeaway so far is that Lewis is going to follow up with the Golang team, and that the group here is aligned that our use case is common and one that you're all would expect to support as well. And,
right.
And it's not crazy.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. It didn't sound crazy in the beginning, but now it looks like more people agree with that. Okay, good.
Do our testing and let you know if it works or not.
Yeah. So we have 3 more items. So I added the next one. So this is basically, I don't know if Shriram, are you on the call, Shriram or Vadim?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Because basically I would like to have like a statement how Gateway works, especially with regards to SNI, so that people are aware. And also about all the things to be aware of. So for instance, not use complete wildcard in the gateway, because that will not work with SNI and all those things. So if you could please talk a bit about this and educate people.
most of these usability bugs have been resolved. Like you can definitely use wildcards, and the SNI would automatically be disabled and so on. The biggest issue that is left right now is organizing the secrets and essentially figuring out a way to load multiple certificates in the gateway. Today we are launching these gateways. I mean, at least the Istio version of gateways via a Helm template, where we have hard-coded 2 secret volumes, and that effectively means you can only load 2 certificates. One of them is actually taken up by Istio. That's the Istio MTLS authentication certificate. So we essentially provide the user with only one specific secret, like Istio, Ingress, Cert, and so on, and that's the only keypad that the user can actually load into the gateway. And that sort of restricts a bunch of things that people can do. Somebody is actually savvy enough to go look at the Helm chart and tweak it and add more secret volume. Then load multiple certificates in the gateway, and once you do that, then it's very easy to set up the SNI stuff. I mean, based on the gateway specification. So yes, in my opinion, that's the biggest the adoptability issue so far. And other than that, we have, the other painful part is this whole namespace business with the gateways. So if you have gateways in different namespaces, then it's unclear as to how to address these gateways across different namespaces. And so I'm working with Zach to clarify that and or simplify that piece. And then other than that, I think we have the gateway almost. So we also need some form of a tool in the Istio CPL, or we just need to ship have a task or something that shows how people can write a simple gateway specification and launch an Istio proxy pod as a gateway pod. I mean, if today we are shipping 2 default gateways, like Egress gateway and Ingress gateway, but people might want to launch their own gateways, and so if we just provide people with a generic template where they just simply replace the names and launch their own gateway, then that would make it a lot more easier, because they can just run an internal gateway, external gateway, whatever it is, and we can continue using the Istio gateways for our purposes. So that is probably a documentation thing, or I don't know, some template or scripting thing such that somebody can quickly generate a gateway. It's effectively just a create a service with a pod spec where the pod mode is a router mode. That's all. And so these are the 2 biggest caveats and gotchas with the gateway stuff so far. And based on what I've seen people struggle with in the mailing list, it seems to be these 2 things, especially the HTTPS stuff. I mean, for the people who tested this, thanks a lot, and we found those issues on the SNI, the wildcard stuff, and or the way SNI was matched, and Piotr fixed a couple of bugs in Envoy, and then, not bugs, fixed some things in Envoy, and then I also fixed a bunch of things in Istio. So these bugs should be gone by now, such that you can declare a gateway port as HTTPS. That would effectively mean it's TLS termination and forwarding to the backend as HTTPS in whichever way you want to. And you can do the same thing for other protocols, TCP as well. And think of the gateway as a proxy which always terminates TLS. Unless otherwise you tell the gateway to not terminate TLS, it will terminate.
So the way to tell it to not terminate is to mark the port as TCP, right?
No. So you can still declare the port as HTTPS, but there is a mode in the TLS settings for the gateway, and that mode has multiple options. One is a pass-through mode, which is SNI pass-through. So if you specify the TLS mode as pass-through, then the gateway will just simply route the traffic and it will not terminate TLS. But if you specify simple TLS or mutual TLS, then it will do whatever that mode says.
This is a question about the gateway SNI implementation. Does the person who's writing the gateway config need to explicitly associate a single server certificate with the single host name or set of host names that cert matches, or is there a capability?
That's a good point. I think that is, can we use the same certificate path and simply specify different names? Or I don't know if Piotr is also on the call, that he might be able to better answer this question. Or Harvey might be able to answer this question as well.
What's the question? Sorry.
So, I mean, can I have a single certificate which holds the certs for multiple different host names? And then
you have to ask Piotr about that. Sorry.
Yeah.
So Piotr, are you on the call?
I can answer for that. Yes, the answer is yes. You can have a certificate with multiple names.
Okay, can I have multiple certificates for multiple host names on a single gateway port, server port?
That's the SNI feature, yes.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So Sriram, you also said that you can have like also multiple certificates as part of a secret. Right?
I think that is to what Costin says. You just simply take one certificate and stick in a whole bunch of different TLS certificates and create one big Uber certificate, and use that certificate as a secret in Kubernetes. Or you essentially like mount multiple secret volumes. Each volume contains a specific TLS certificate.
But right now, does the code support mounting multiple secrets?
It's not a code, it's actually a Helm template issue. So if somebody wants to like mount 20 different certificates, they have to go and tweak the Helm templates that we have for Gateway and simply mount like 20 different secrets. And
sorry, Sriram, not necessarily. I mean, I think we discussed about the fact that you can have this a single secret where you can put multiple certificates, because one secret will as many as
there are two options. That's why I said like you can either do what Costin is saying, where you create one certificate and load them in the same secret, or you create multiple secrets, one per certificate, and then load them all. But the second one requires you to change the Helm template. The first one is do the thing.
And we don't want to change the template, users to change the template. We kind of prefer people to go with the first option, where there is a secret that is mounted by the template, and in that secret they can put all their certificates together in one big happy secret.
But in the end, it's up to the user to decide, right? For instance, if they keep adding gateways, if they keep adding like hosts and supports, and they don't want to change their original certificate, right? In that case, for them, it might be desirable just to mount a new ingress and modify the gateway and
if they add a new ingress, they get a new IP address, and it's not really SNI. I mean, it's a different thing. I would say
no, but I'm saying if they add, let's say they want to add a new certificate in the system, maybe for some service, right? They maybe for them is desirable to just simply modify via Helm or just kubectl to modify the ingress specific, the gateway specification to mount the new secret, right? Without altering their original certificate, the big one.
They're not altering the certificates, they're altering the secret. So there is one secret in which you need to have multiple files. A secret can hold multiple files. And that files can be there big.
I get it.
And then they can have 100 other files, each a key and a certificate.
So I see. And the secret is mounted. Go ahead.
Yeah, the secret is just a directory, basically. It's mounted to a directory, and all the files in that secret is a file created in that directory. It doesn't scale, but for scalability, we'll have the SDS when we'll have it.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. So how does the host name get associated with the certificate to be served? Is that just based on the gateway?
It's based on the client hello. So the start of the TLS handshake includes the host names that you want to talk with. And then Envoy is looking, based on the filters that Piotr implemented, is looking to match that particular host name with one of the certificates.
Okay, so within a single listener, Envoy is capable of matching an incoming SNI host name against a variety of various different certificates that it might know about for that one listener.
The host name would have to be in the Istio API, right?
It is part of the Istio API. When you specify the gateway, you specify the certificate for each particular host.
Okay, but if I did a gateway where the gateway host name was just star and then I loaded several certificates into the server port for that gateway, would it pick the appropriate certificate depending on the client SNI?
But I thought SNI is disabled if you specify star. That's what Sriram said.
If you specify star, that star will get the big certificate, the default certificate.
That makes no sense. Why?
I see. Okay, so it sounds like the system is not capable of selecting which server certificate to return based only on the client hello. That we need to pre-configure particular host name certificate matching.
Absolutely. You need to first of all, for a host name, you need to get a certificate for that host name, put it in the secret, and then create a gateway where you specify the file path where you put the certificate for that host. And from that, Envoy will be configured with the host that you just put in the gateway and pointing to the files that you specified. So it requires some user intervention and user configuration. But Istio, if you put everything in place, we will support it.
Right. Okay. So this is functionality that we have in Cloud Foundry, and so we're just sort of surprised that it's not baked already into Envoy. But I guess we can compensate for this by building a system that will, given a set of certificates, generate a gateway for each certificate, right? So we'll automatically generate a gateway for each certificate that we want to support. Okay.
Another reason not to expose Istio to users.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I still need to take more notes because I got lost in the discussion, but could you please also review that, what is there is correct, and add to the notes? Any more questions on this beside mine? Nope? Okay, good. We have 2 more items and 6 minutes, so I don't know if this is doable, but we'll go in the order. So how to configure a gateway to allow both H1 and H2 on the same port, Gabe?
Yeah, we might have just screwed this up, but I see there's several different ways of configuring the port on the gateway. There's HTTP, HTTPS, HTTP2. Is there a way for us to configure a gateway port so that it can accept either H1 or H2 and do the right thing in either case?
Envoy supports an auto detect.
Yep. Yeah, that's a APNS negotiation. I think it is supported. I don't know if it's exposed in the API or it's automatic. Shriram, do you remember if we have any?
I missed the question. What was it again?
Can I configure? Go ahead, Constant. That's fine.
So if APNS negotiation, I mean the selection of H2 and H1 is enabled by default, or user need to do any action?
It's enabled by default. There's nothing that needs to be done. We set up all HTTP listeners to automatically negotiate H1, H2.
When I'm writing a gateway config on the port, there's a field called protocol. What should I set that field to in order to enable the automatic H1 or H2?
I don't know. That it would automatically be enabled for any HTTP2 based protocols, whether it's like gRPC, HTTP2, or HTTP. It would be enabled. So, but I mean, this is just for your own purposes and logging purposes that you declare the port as a gRPC port or HTTP2 port or HTTP port. So as long as you declare it as a HTTP port, you should be good.
You mean it doesn't have any effect on behavior?
It doesn't have any effect on behavior because the reason is that so it doesn't have any effect on the behavior
of Envoy.
That is receiving the data, because Envoy that is receiving the data will be able to automatically detect whether the incoming protocol is HTTP2 or HTTP1.
So what's the point of the field?
The point of the field is that if you have deployed this gateway as an internal gateway, then for other sidecars that are talking to the gateway, they need to know whether they're talking to an HTTP2 gateway or whether they're talking to a HTTP1 gateway. Because today Envoy does not have the ability to auto upgrade from HTTP 1 to 2 when it makes an outbound connection. And that is the reason we ask users to explicitly state whether the port is a HTTP 1 or 2. So the gateway is not just for ingress. You can also use the gateway as an internal gateway, and that means all the other sidecars gateway. And in this case, this gateway is no different than a Kubernetes service, where you have to declare what type of port is being used for the service.
Okay, so if we are seeing a situation in which H2 clients are their H2 upgrade request is not being passed through to our backend, it's not because our gateway is misconfigured. It might be because our service protocol is H1 instead of H2. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And make sure it is HTTP or H2, not H2C, because H2C is different.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you.
Per our previous discussion, anything other than H2C really isn't viable.
If you want, I mean, you have the option to terminate H2 in the ingress, for example.
Yes, at the gateway.
At the gateway, yes.
Got it.
All right, 2 more minutes, and Liam, we have a topic called Proxy-config command. So, Liam, are you there?
Yeah. So basically, I just wanted to make everyone aware that the Proxy-config command is now in. So if you want to debug Pilot or you want to debug your individual proxies, so Envoy is running, you can basically, the endpoint 1 curls the admin interface, and the Pilot 1 talks to Pilot to debug things. So it's a much easier way to debug Pilot issues, basically, and Envoy issues.
Oh, this is super cool.
Awesome.
Feature. Yeah. We love when people add ability to debug, to troubleshoot, because we're really having a hard time sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for adding that.
And
Wow.
10 seconds pointer to the new shell script that can dump all the logs from the cluster, which is very useful.
Did you edit here or?
Well, someone added to the implementation. It should be in the documentation as well. I'm just mentioning it in case people.
Okay. So are you talking about the like the Control Z introspection?
No. There is a shell script in the release that can be used to get to gather all the logs from all the and does get a lot of debug information.
Okay, good. I see. I'll try to dig it out. Maybe add it to the meeting notes. And we are at the top of the hours, and we made it actually through all the items in the agenda. So that's great. Thanks so much to everybody. Enjoy the rest of your days. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
I think I stopped.